been on the subject of the lost tribes and trying to bring together so we don't end up in a whole series and a series and a series of trying to simplify a very complicated subject, which requires taking a good understanding of the books of the Bible. And I say good understanding by obviously understanding references to North and South, and then being able to distinguish between references to the Assyrian versus the Assyrians, which many times the Assyrian being referred to is talking about the Antichrist, and the Assyrians, the people in the kingdom of the period which we are discussing. There's all these different necessities, separating the prophets and understanding who was prophet to the north or to the south, and who they were prophesying to or against. A clear understanding of 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles as writings of the north and the south. And the importance, even starting right at the beginning, where after Moses, we establish Moses and his lineage and the sons and the house of Israel coming out of Egypt's bondage, and the way the encampment is established, which will have much to do, by the way, when you take that beginning of the tribes with the final land allotment. Very interesting in Ezekiel, which is future time. And the importance of recognizing that some of the people that we have identified as part of the lost tribes, and other peoples that we have, I think in most recent history or most recent archaeological discoveries has made it clear that there were successive waves of people who might have had the same name, and as generations go, there are groups being merged together that then become one, that then bifurcate again. Tracing these people. Now, there's the most basic footprint of tracing, the things that for people who've been here for a few years, we can look at the tribe of Dan, for example, and we're told Dan is like a serpent winding, and we begin to trace all the places that are named after the tribe of Dan. And we see there, they go very far. The necessity of understanding some of those that depart from the Judah line, who will end up attached to places like Troy. There's all of these kind of subcategories you have to pick apart. And ultimately, there are certain groups of people who will be more prominent than others. Putting them on a historical timeline, along with the rulers that we can identify, gives us certain pegs in time that we can kind of have an idea of migrations. And then once you go back into the archaeological element, we can identify, as now there have been so many more, and just in the last 10 to 15 years, there have been many more finds, not in the places such as Assyria or Nineveh, not in those places, but many more finds in areas and territories that we would have not really assumed to look, that these archaeological finds, with pretty good precision based on the materials found, can date and ascertain the origins of many of these people who obviously were not native to these parts where these archaeological finds have been uncovered. So if time were to permit it tonight, I was going to discuss that with you, because that's one of the things that I've told you. I don't approach the Bible by trying to find the tangible artifacts and say, see, it exists. The Bible to me is the Word of God, it is the truth, and then somehow along the way I believe that science, the sciences of forensic, archaeological, those sciences that are able to unearth, and both by writing, by the type of writing, by the type of materials used, to ascertain with very good precision within a small window to what epoch, to what year, to what date these items belonged, and the origins of the materials that were not native to these places where they were found. So all of these things become extremely fascinating for me, because I love all of these kind of subcategories that lend back to the fact that this is not just some mythological invention. And it's impossible to have people such as Herodotus, you've got the writer Strabo, you've got a plethora of sources. Pliny records some elements, but not all. Diodorus Siculus, as I've said, chronicles some, Josephus some. And there is enough material just in those ancient literary finds, combined with some of the newer, as I said, I have been using, this is kind of interesting because this Brill's New Poly Encyclopedia of the Ancient World, and I've got a lot of different types of these A&E, Ancient Near East sources like this. And they're not all consistent, because some of the articles are being produced by people whose sole vision, their sole function is completely detached from the Bible, has nothing to do with the Bible even though I'm sure they know the correlation of the people or the existence or the mentions, but is purely, in one case, archaeological, in another it is purely geographical. In another case, it's ethnological, because it's someone who's tracing the origin of peoples. So what I want to do is I want to keep you dangling now, because I'm not going to start something tonight that I won't be able to finish. But I do want to tell you that the subject is so important because, as I said, the people, if you just consider the people that moved and migrated, consider where they moved, the Lake Urmia, Lake Van, all of the different mountain passes. And if we follow a migration pattern of those people that moved, and we can follow certain times where invasions occurred, territories were conquered by mysterious people that arrived in large groups, they were well versed on how to invade, but they were not necessarily warriors. In the case of the Scythians, we've got a good ability to trace the fact that these were broken into three categories of people: farmers, agricultural, because they don't put pastoral and agricultural together, they're separate, and royal, those that had some lineage They're broken up into 3 categories. And just even to follow these 3 categories, and where these people left a lot of things on the way. I'm talking now, I'm going back to archaeological evidence. There's a great map in this book that is kind of remarkable. In fact, I was looking at it, I was kind of a little bit staggered by, just to give you a little teaser, and then I'll let you go. But if you can see the map, all those dots are places where there have been cultural and archaeological finds. The yellow has nothing to do with what I'm talking about right now, but the little dots do. And so it's quite remarkable. And we begin to discover that there are even subcultures within these peoples. But the most remarkable thing is that those that migrated and the pattern that they migrated and our ability to trace down via the historical timeline by virtue of, right now, archaeological resources and finds. But to those people, and there had to be a remnant that did not migrate. And that's a whole subject. I'm interested in the lost tribes and the pattern of migration of those people that got taken from the north and got moved and kept moving. But I'm equally interested in the people, and there had to be some who did not move. In fact, we've got historical proof of those people who headed back in the direction from where they originally came from. We've got good material for that. And then there's that other thing, the people to the south, which we know the number of those that returned was small in proportion to those that were carried away. And so if those people remained, if the bulk of the people of the South remained in the land where they were deported, and they began to plant their lives there 70 years and have children, and their children had children, and their children had children, and their children had children, that means that that land that began to expand with people having babies and producing families, many of those people settled in that land are Jews. Plain and simple. And they probably don't even know it. That's a whole different subject of fascination for me, because it tells me that there is a group of people, more than one group, but certainly a group of people regarding that particular territory, that many generations down the road would have become like, but not nomadic tribes, but like nomadic tribes. Virtually the identity of their whole group would have been hinged on the elder. And as time goes by, the customs and everything that they did. Remember, those that came back in Ezra and Nehemiah's day, they couldn't understand the language. Somebody had to tell them and teach them. They didn't understand. Very few did anyway. So when you begin to open up that, it becomes, that's a whole different study, but it's a whole different study of like, wow, I want to take a look at that, because there's a whole group of people right there that don't even know their identity. And it's under the nose of every individual. This is what's so ironic, as you begin to look and study the origin of these people who are settled there, there's a very strong irony. And then there's the other ironic thing, which is, as going back to those from the north that moved under different names, that migrate, that will then basically scatter the whole earth, become essentially, if you think about going back to the different tribes, we talk about Ephraim and Manasseh. If one interprets the tribes that way as the United States and Britain, if one interprets it that way, you have a large portion of these lost tribes who can, obviously, if we were to be able to trace back and go back far enough, to essentially being scattered all over the face of the earth. And you'll hear people say the most ignorant things against either Christians or Jews in the place that has been scattered by these people now generations and generations and generations past. The great confusion of if people even believe in what will happen in the last days. And that's why I said to you, there's something so remarkable about looking at all of this, settling it down to something very clear, and then understanding when the prophet Ezekiel talks about the restoration of the house of Israel and the house of Judah being put back together as one cannot approach that prophecy in the narrow-mindedness of an Old Testament perspective, because Israel and the house of Israel has been scattered everywhere. So if you begin to look at that prophecy for a future time, there has to be some event that will bring that to pass. And that requires some hard thought. It's a very simple thing I just said, but it requires some hard thought, because you can just categorize the house of Israel into the house of Israel and the house of Judah, and the two sticks put together become one. But if you really think about how far the house of Israel has been scattered for that prophecy to come to pass and to be exactly what it means, it's going to require a cataclysmic event. So that's why I want to make sure this is clear when we understand this study is not something of a black hole where it's just so interesting and you keep going. I want to make sure we understand we're going to be looking at in depth at least a few more of these people to get a good glimpse to see, and I'd like to share some of the later discoveries in the last, probably, as I said, the last 10 years or so that have been made that really are quite riveting, that will kind of seal the deal for some of you who are still on the fence about, I don't know about, could these be the same people? Could these actually be the same people? And we're not talking about some random, questionable small shard that's been found, but some substantial evidence. So the evidence will definitely demand for the thinking person or the skeptic to take a second look.
To this house, magnify the Lord, lift up holy hands, our hearts in one accord, worship and bow down before Him.